Hey everyone, and welcome to another Explainer, where we take a widely held civic belief, put it to the test against the facts, and help you understand how the system actually works. Today we're looking at a pretty foundational piece of our government. And don't worry, we're not going to sit here and memorize dry textbook definitions. Instead, we're going to see how things operate out there in the real world. Okay, so let's dive right in with an assumption you have almost certainly heard before. Or hey, maybe you even believe it yourself. It is incredibly common to hear people talk about the Supreme Court as if they're, sitting around a big mahogany table drafting up our nation's legislation. In fact, if you just went out and asked the average person on the street, hey, does the Supreme Court make laws? A really massive portion of them would confidently tell you, yes, absolutely they do. And honestly, that sounds perfectly reasonable. I mean, we've all seen the news, right? We know that when the Supreme Court drops a major decision, it can drastically alter public policy, individual rights, and our everyday lives. Because those decisions produce such undeniable real-world changes, our brains just kind of automatically assume the court must have created those changes through lawmaking. We see a new rule of the land taking effect, and we naturally think, well, they must have just made a new law. But here's the contradiction that's going to give you a bit of a wait, that's not what I thought moment. The surprising fact is this. The Supreme Court actually does not create legislation. Period. They don't write it, they don't introduce it, and they definitely don't pass it. Only Congress has the power to create legislation. Which brings us to a pretty massive central question. If the Supreme Court isn't making laws, if they aren't acting as legislators, what exactly are they doing when they issue those huge landscape-shifting decisions? If they aren't creating the rules, how on earth are they changing the rules? Let's break it down. Section 1. Checking the receipts. What the Constitution actually says. So the crucial thing to know here is that the Constitution very specifically divides power into three totally distinct buckets. Under Article I, Congress is given the power to introduce, debate, and pass laws. Then you have Article II, which outlines the presidency. The president's job is to sign those bills into law or veto them. Notice the president doesn't create the legislation either. Finally, we have Article III, which establishes the Supreme Court, and their job is beautifully specific. They interpret laws and resolve constitutional questions. That's it. They don't introduce bills, they don't vote on legislation, they simply interpret it. Section 2. How the system actually works. The life cycle of a law. Now, to really grasp this, look at the actual timeline of how a law comes to be. A member of Congress introduces legislation. The House and Senate debate it and vote on it. Then it heads over to the president, who either signs it or vetoes it. Now catch this. That entire lawmaking process is completely finished before we ever even get to step 5. A law is completely created and signed long before the Supreme Court is anywhere near the picture. It's only way down at the very end, in step 6, that the Supreme Court might step in. And even then, it's just to review how an existing law is being applied, clarify what the text means, or decide if it complies with the Constitution. They are the final reviewers, for sure, but they are absolutely not the creators. Section 3. Why people get confused. Separating outcome from mechanism. So, if the process is laid out that clearly, why does everybody seem to get it wrong? Well, it's completely understandable why really intelligent people get this mixed up, and it mostly boils down to the media. When a major ruling happens, the media heavily focuses on the real-world outcome. They talk about who won, who lost, and how society is going to change. And that makes sense. That's the part that actually impacts our daily lives. But because of that intense focus on the outcome, we almost entirely miss the legal reasoning. We don't see the complex process of the court interpreting an existing law. We just see the final result, and our brains take a shortcut. We think, oh, the law changed, so the court must have made a new law. But in reality, the court is just explaining what an existing law actually means. Congress creates it, the court explains it. Two totally different responsibilities. Section 4, the aha moment. Interpretation versus creation. This brings us to the core insight of this explainer. Ask yourself this. Can changing how a law is interpreted change things out in the real world? Yes, absolutely. But does that mean the court created the law? Definitely not. Changing an interpretation and creating new legislation are just two fundamentally different things. Think of it like a referee in a football game. A referee interpreting the rules can completely change the outcome of a match, but that definitely doesn't mean the referee sat down and wrote the rule book. Ultimately, understanding our government really isn't about memorizing fancy titles or complex legal jargon. It's about understanding responsibilities. It's actually pretty simple. Congress creates laws. The president signs or vetoes laws. The Supreme Court interprets laws. Three branches, three very different roles, all working together to balance each other out within one constitutional system. Once you understand who is actually responsible for what, I promise you, watching the news starts to make a whole lot more sense. Section 5. Think for yourself. A question of reflection. Let's just take a quick second to reflect on all this, because the goal here isn't just to memorize a fact and move on. It's to look at our system with a bit more curiosity. If the Supreme Court does not make laws, why do so many people so strongly believe that they do? Is it just because we get totally distracted by the outcome of a decision instead of paying attention to the role each branch is actually playing? And honestly, if so many of us are wrong about something this fundamental, what other government powers might people be completely misunderstanding right now? This has been another NJ Red Assumption Check. Question everything, learn something, think for yourself. And if this surprised you, check out the companion master sheet where we break down the full process step by step.